Can a believer be disqualified from heaven? This is a question that's often brought up by those who believe that a person can lose their salvation or that a person through their behavior can prove that they were never saved to begin with. And they typically base this argument on 1 Corinthians 9:27, which reads this, "But I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified." So is this what 1 Corinthians 9:27 is actually teaching? Well, contextually, Paul is in a section of 1 Corinthians dealing with the exercise or restriction of Christian liberty. In other words, when the scriptures do not clearly take a stand on a cultural issue, how should the Christian respond, even if they have the freedom scripturally to respond multiple ways? And in this section, chapter 9, verses 24 through 27, Paul reveals his own underlying motivation in laying aside some of his own liberties to live the Christian life more effectively. And what he does is he uses two athletic metaphors, running a race and boxing or wrestling, to illustrate this truth for the athletically crazed Corinthians. Remember, at this time in history, the city of Corinth hosted the Isthmian Games, which were similar in prestige to the Olympic Games. And so he uses an example that they would be very familiar with. Now notice throughout, though, this section, chapter 9, 24 through 27, that Paul's emphasis is not just winning the race or winning the boxing match. It's winning by doing it the right way, with the right attitude, with the right preparation, and thus playing by the rules of the game. And this is why he says in verse 24, run in such a way. He's describing how one runs. And in verse 25, the competitor is described as being temperate or self-controlled in all things, describing winning the right way. Also in verse 26, he describes running with certainty and fighting with purpose, describing the intentionality and how they compete. And then notice the spiritual comparisons he makes in verse 25 when you go there, because athletes compete for a perishable crown, but Christians run their race for an imperishable crown. They run for an eternal reward. And in verse 27, notice the activity that Paul uses to describe how he might be disqualified is preaching. It's not sinning. And this is where many people go wrong. They think that disqualification has to do with somebody's sin. That's not what Paul says here. In fact, read verse 27 again. "But I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified." So he's describing that even when he's preaching, he needs to do it in such a way that's pleasing to the Lord, or he won't receive the reward. So being disqualified here is not being disqualified from heaven, for which we are all disqualified to begin with, and hence why we are all saved by grace alone. But rather, Paul is talking about being disqualified from potential reward. And as we've said many times in the past, the only way to qualify for heaven is when you trust in God's solution, not only for your sin debt, but also for a righteousness that's equal to his. And that's the only way somebody can be qualified for heaven, when they trust in the finished work of Jesus Christ.